Hi, for today we're going to talk about fractions on a number line. But then I got to thinking, a number line is something quite similar to what we use every day. I have what's called a measuring tape. A measuring tape is like a ruler, but it's in a tape form, and you use this around the house for working and doing shop and measuring things. And if I look at it, it's broken up into inches. So it starts at 0, here's 1 inch, 2 inch, 3 inch. And if you look closely, there's tiny little increments or fractions, equal parts of those inches. Fractions, equal parts of the whole. We have meter sticks. Meter sticks, and we're going to talk about the inches, is going to be our unit or our whole. And the same thing. Here's 0, here's 1. And then you see all these little lines in between each of the wholes. Those are whole inches broken up into fractions or equal parts of the whole. So we've already been using fractions and not realized it. So we're going to do fractions on a number line similar to how fractions would be on our ruler. So let's take a look at, here's the end of my ruler. That's going to be 0. And I'm going to start with right here, this is 1. So instead of a number line, instead of a fraction bar, this is our number line, and this is our whole. Our whole we're going to call 1 inch. And then fractions are equal parts of the whole. So if I took that 1 inch and I broke it in half like a fraction, I would do a little hash mark here, and I would mark that 1/2. And we know 1/2 plus 1/2 equal 1 whole. So I could break that down even smaller into 4 equal pieces, because this would be 1, 2, 3, 4. And I know 4 equal pieces, or 4/4 equals 1 whole. So this would be 1/4. This is 1/2 or 2/4. Remember, those are equivalent fraction. Whenever my top numerator is half of my bottom denominator, that's 1/2. So 1/4, 2/4, 3/4. So how many fourths equal a whole? 1, 2, 3, 4/4 equal 1 whole. If I want to get into a mixed number or wholes and fractional pieces, I'm going to add another inch onto my number line. And now this is 2. And just like I did right here, halfway through is going to be 1/2. And then this is 1/4. And this is 1/4. So each inch or each whole is broken up into 4 equal pieces or fourths. So I'm going to put a dot on my fraction line here. I'm going to put one right here. Oh, that doesn't show up very well. Let's try a darker color. I'll do one right here and label it A. And I'll do another one right here and label it B. Now, if I want to locate where those are on a number line, I'm going to look. A, it's not quite 1 whole yet, but it's a fractional or an equal part of that. It happens to be at 3/4. So A equals 3/4. And then let's look where B is. B is already past the 1 whole, so it's 1 1/4, 2/4, 3/4. So it's 1 whole. B equals 1 whole and 1, 2, 3/4, 3/4. So I labeled these a little differently in each of those fourths, but this would be 1/4, this would be 2/4, or this would be 3/4. So I have A at 3/4 and B at 1 whole and 3/4. I could look at this and I could subtract, or I could find the difference between A and B. as in how much larger is B at 1 3/4 than A at 3/4. I could add up the fourths. 1, 2, 3/4. Oh, so B is 4/4 larger than A, but I know once again 4/4 equals 1. So it's 1 whole. And if I look, here's 3/4, here's 1 3/4. So it is 1 whole larger. So let's compare my 1 whole we're talking about. Here's 0. And here's 1. And we'll make another. Here's 1. And here's 0. Now I'm going to take the top one and I'm going to go with my fourths again. Remember, 4 equal pieces in the whole, so that's 1/4. This is 2/4 or 1/2. And this is 3/4. And then there's 1 whole. My bottom, I'm going to divide into 3 equal pieces. So this will be 1/3, 2/3, and then what is this going to be? This is going to be 3/3. Just like this would be 1/4, 2/4, 3/4. This would be 4/4. 1 equals 4/4. 1 equals 3/3. So on my number line, I'm going to do A right there. And then down here, I'm going to do B. So A equals A equals 2/4 or 1/2. And B is at B equals 2/3. If I look at these and my inch is the exact same size, here's 1 inch and here's 1 inch, I can look and say, is 2/4 or 1/2 larger or smaller than 2/3? I could take something and measure it. I could hold my paper up and say, ooh, there's where my 1/2 is. Here's where my 2/3 are. So I would know 2/3 is greater than 1/2. And if I would say, I don't know about that, I could take this number line up here and I could make it into thirds. So this would probably be 1/3, this would be 2/3, and this would be 3/3. And again, I can see, here's my 2/3, here's my 1/2. Let's go back to our traditional number line. Here's 0. Oh, I'm going to, let's see, go to 3. So that would be 1 inch, 2 inches, 3 inches. So in each of those, I'm going to go to the half. And then I'm going to break that down even smaller into 1/4. And we know this is also 2/4. This is 3/4. 1 is 4/4. Numerator, denominator, the same, 1 whole. And again, here's 1/4 of that. This is 2/4 of an inch. This is 3/4 of an inch. And that's another full inch. 1/4, 2/4, 3/4. I'm going to put dot right here and call this A. I'm going to put B way back here. And I'm going to put C over here. So I have 3 dots on my number line, and I'm going to locate them. So first I'm going to look at where A is. A is Here's 1 whole, and here's 2 wholes. So it's 1 whole, and then my first mark is 1/4. So A is 1 and 1/4. I'm going to look for B. B equals, 0 is the same thing as 0/4. I don't have anything. So B is at my 1/4 plus 1/4. B is 2/4, or if I simplify it, 1/2. And then lastly, let's get to C. C is 1 whole, 2 whole, and 1/4. C equals 2 and 1/4. If I wanted to do some subtracting or find out what the difference is, and remember, difference is the answer to a subtraction problem. What is the difference between, let's do, the largest difference on there, the difference between C and B. So C is 2 and 1/4, and B is 2/4 or 1/2. I'm going to keep it as a common denominator where my bottom number is the same. It'll make it a little bit easier. So I have 2 and 1/4 minus 2/4. I can go back and do the way I learned to subtract this way, or I can just use my number line, knowing that each one of these increments is 1/4. So the difference between B and C is, let's go with 1/4, 2/4, 3/4, 4/4, 5, 6, 7/4. That's 7/4. And this goes back to what we learned before. 7/4 is a fraction greater than a whole because I only need 4 pieces to make a whole and I have 7. So I could do the division. 4 into 7 is 1, remainder 3. So I would know that the difference is 1 and 3/4. And that's how easy fractions are on a number line. Just think of them as a ruler and think of each one of these increments as an equal part of that whole inch or that whole section.